Hey guys, I'm sure you've read the problem. Of course, they've got another fun story for you here, but breaking it all down, here's what we know. They're talking about a class of 32 8th graders at a specific school, and they give us a whole breakdown in a chart in your book about the sports that they prefer to do. Now, I know there are 32 students because they told me there are 32 students, but you're going to notice I put a little table on the board here, and looking at the table that they've given you and the table that I have here, we can fill this out. We know that there are 17 total surveyed that were female. So we know 17 female. They say that total there were 15 male. You notice they put those numbers in bold. Those are extremely important in this problem. And of course, summing these together, they get the 32 total that they've started with. This is important because we're going to be writing fractions, and of course, a lot of the times we write our fractions out of a total amount, this, okay? Now, I'm analyzing this, and they say, okay, there are 4 different possible sport activities that they prefer to do. And one thing to keep in mind here is that it is very, very possible, okay, that some of these people voted more than once. That is one major reason why, if you added up the number of females that preferred to play basketball, track and field, softball, and football, that would add up to be, I would say, 21, 31, about 35, but there are only 17 females to begin with. Some of these young ladies had voted to do more than one sport, or say that they preferred to do so. So don't get worried about that or frustrated with it. Know that it's totally accurate. Okay, moving on, I want to start looking at question number 1, which says, which fraction of the class is female? Okay, now when we say which fraction of the total class is female, I need to know 2 things. 1, how many total people are in the class? Of course, we know that there are 32. And the second thing is, well, how many are female? Once I've obtained this information, which wasn't hard to come by in the first place, what I can do is I can write how many female there are out of the total amount. Now, I'm actually writing this. I'm going to expect that you guys can come up with the numbers on your own. But after writing this, I say there are this many females out of this many total. You go right on to the second question, which asks, what percent of the class is female? Now they say, what percent of the class is female? If you're not sick of this by now, then I'm going to beat you over the head with it again. But here we go. A fraction and a percentage, and as a matter of fact, decimals, are extremely, extremely related. As a matter of fact, before we have our percentage on number 2, we have to know this fraction in the first place. Oh, weird. It's funny that they asked you this question first. But once you have this, what we'll do is, of course, take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. Of course, we know how many females there are, how many total there are in the entire class. But once you've divided this, I want to bring up one thing. This is not the answer, by the way. But if you got a number like this, 0.47589, and I know this can't be right, by the way, because there were more females to begin with, so there should be slightly more than 50% of the class female. But I'm looking at this, and it says 0.47589. Sorry, my phone's ringing there. But once I do this, long division preferably, you can check your answer on a calculator. Of course, to convert this decimal to a percent, you would scooch it twice to the right. So once you have taken this numerator and split it by the denominator, you're going to come up with this, and you scooch the decimal twice to the right. So the non-answer for number 2 would be like this, about 47%. Now, like I'm saying, this is not the answer. You'll have the answer once you have decided to do this problem on your own. Now, you look ahead at number 3, it says, what percent of the class is male? Okay, this is the same exact question that they just asked you in number 2, except for they're not asking you about the girls now, they're asking you about the guys. Weird thing is, they should have asked you a different question first. What fraction of the class is male first? You need to write the fraction out of the total amount of the class that is male. Once you've done this, you got it. You're going to take that numerator and divide by the denominator. You're going to get a decimal. But you need to convert that into a percentage. So the first 3 kind of go without saying. Now, number 4 is going to ask you to write 2 statements comparing participation in basketball to participation in football. Here's the hard part about it. Just like we went over how many people go camping 2 or more times per year and compare different age groups. Or, you know what, in class we've actually done some investigations in which we compared activities that we like to do. We kept track of the data. The hard part about comparing boys to girls, or in this case, or different age groups for camping is the fact that they don't ask the same amount of people. So one thing to keep in mind is it's very easy to compare numbers if they had asked the same amount in the first place. And if they didn't ask the same amount, here's what we can do. We can start talking about percentages. Percent means out of 100. If everything was out of 100, it would be that much easier. So, looking at this, what they want us to do is, reading this again, is write two statements comparing participation in basketball to participation in football. You could say, okay, this percent of the class plays basketball and this percent of the class plays football, but we're talking about out of the total class. I'm talking boys and girls here. One thing that you could actually do in this situation is to take the table you have in the book and extend it so that for each sport, of course, these columns would represent total down here. There would be 32 total students. You could say, in basketball, how many out of the entire class preferred to play it, boys and girls together? And I say, well, 14 girls said they liked to play basketball, and 13 boys said they liked to play basketball. That's 27 entire people out of the entire class that preferred to play basketball. Now, I don't mind starting this one with you, but if you wanted to compare basketball to football, which, by the way, football is down here, and had 15 total people playing it, I know what you're thinking. 4 girls said they wanted to do this, which I think is totally rad. But, you know, I'm looking at this, and I say, okay, 27 out of 32 of the entire class prefer to play basketball, whereas 15 out of 32 prefer to play football. Okay, what we're going to do is, let's calculate some percentages. I said I'd do this one with you. So we talk about a percentage of the entire class that likes to play basketball. We're talking 27 out of 32. Once again, how am I going to turn this into a percent? I'm going to have to take the top and divide it by the bottom. Okay, you know what, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, but I say, well, 27 divided by 32, and my calculator actually yields an answer 0.84375. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call this approximately 84%. And the lovely ish at the end. So 84% of the class prefers to play football, all together with boys and girls. You know what? After saying 15 out of 32, that's not even close to 27 out of 32. I do need you to find this percentage. But once you find this percent, I want you to compare this percent for football to the percent for basketball. And one question you might ask yourself, and it goes back to this, I was shocked that there were 4 girls that said, yeah, I'd like to play football, is this. Why is there a higher percentage of the class that likes to play basketball than percent of the class that likes to play football? Why might that be true if we're talking about the entire class? Okay. Number 7, in which sports is there a greater percent of female participation than male participation? You need to go through sport by sport and find out, well, okay, which sport for females had a high participation? I'd say, looking at basketball and softball, there were 14 out of 17 girls that played basketball and 10 out of 17 girls that played softball. Compare that to boys playing basketball and boys playing softball. Compare those percents. But it says which one had a higher percent of the total amount of girls play that sport than the percent of boys that played that particular sport. And you need to tell me, why do you think that's true? And then lastly it says, number 8, if the percents of participation in these sports for all students at Springbrook are approximately the same as the percents for the class that we are in, okay, about how many of the 368 female students in the school like to play softball? Okay, excuse me, not for the class we're in, maybe the class that they are in. They're saying if that percent of females like to play that sport in that class, how many would that be approximately out of 368? Once you find the sport that was really popular among females and what percent of that class that were females played that sport, take that percent and find that percentage of 368. Remember, when you find a percentage of something, and this would just be an example, I just made up 20%, but if I wanted 20% of 368, what I would do is I would take 368 times 20% as a decimal, and of course we know working backwards from a percentage to a decimal, it would be scooch us back twice to the left. We would take this times 0.20, and of course you know why I put 368 on top. It was the longer of the two numbers. Of course you could do it the other way around. It's your call if you want to do more work, but this would be the tutorial, for page 20, numbers 1 through 8.